This is a alpha preview of how Rails 7 is going to allow you to create wonderful web applications using modern JavaScript without Webpack or any other form of bundling or transpiling. For the past several years, Rails has been shipping with Webpack as the default way of writing JavaScript. We've installed all the JavaScript ecosystem, tooling, package JS, and node modules, and whatever else have you, straight into all new Rails applications. And that is a lot of complexity that for some applications is warranted, and for a lot of other applications isn't warranted anymore. And it is really this anymore part that I want to dig into for a second. The JavaScript ecosystem has advanced quite a lot, particularly recently, with some major new milestones that have been passed that has made this all possible. So I wrote a blog post going over some of those major milestones and why now is the time to go much simpler with JavaScript and why it's now possible to do so. I'll link that in the description below, but briefly, the three major points I cover are the fact that ES6 is now available in all the major browsers. Microsoft has killed off the last holdout, i.e. 11. It's been sunsetted. So now we have a Microsoft Edge, we have Chrome, we have Safari, we have Firefox, who all support ES6. And ES6 includes a JavaScript moduling system called ESM, which is really what we need to escape the transpiling step. Together with ES6, that it's just a wonderful JavaScript that's available natively in the browser now. You don't need to transform the JavaScript you want to write into something else that the browser can execute. Second, HTTP 2 is now ubiquitous, which means that the bundling step, where we take a bunch of different files and turn them into one master file, one huge file, is no longer necessary. We can ship a bunch of tiny files and it doesn't have an impact on performance until you get to hundreds and hundreds of files perhaps. And in fact, it has quite a lot of benefits in terms of caching when you expire just a tiny file and leave everything else still cached. And finally, there is import maps, which allows you to refer to JavaScript modules with logical names rather than using the digest stamped file names that you would perhaps otherwise have to do, which makes it far more cache compatible. Those are the three main reasons I go over in that blog post, but I kind of omitted one key additional component, which was the answer to, yeah, that's all good and well, but what about node modules? How are you going to allow people to rely on NPM modules? There's so much JavaScript libraries and tools and whatever out there. We're not going to go back to downloading individual files and storing them in gems or in vendor or whatever. The answer is JavaScript CDNs. There is a ton of innovation happening right now in JavaScript CDNs. There's things like Skypack, JS Deliver, Unpack, ESM.sh that make it possible to have access to the entire NPM library through the browser. They simply compile everything and make it available on CDNs, so you can refer directly to links for these libraries without compiling them yourself, which is really what enables us to skip the whole installation of Node and everything else, because you're never going to compile any of these libraries yourself anymore. You're just going to rely on them directly from the browser. So those are the advances in the JavaScript scene, and the consequences for that for Rails, as I said, is we can now ship Rails 7 without Webpack by default. You can still use Webpack if you'd like, -- Webpack, and you have everything as it was before, but by default there won't be a Webpack setup. Instead, we will use a new set of gems that allows us to take advantage of these things like import maps and so forth, and I'm going to show that in this video. In addition to that, we're going to ship with Hotwire by default instead of Turbolinks. Been shipping Turbolinks for many years, and Hotwire includes a new and improved version of that called simply Turbo. And Hotwire also includes a tiny JavaScript framework called Stimulus that will be quite enough for lots of applications that they won't need to rely on anything else. But as I said, through these JavaScript CDNs, it's very easy to pull in other libraries and they'll work just fine. And in fact, this setup will work with everything from Vue to whatever else have you. I'll show some of these examples in the demo that follows now. So I'm going to demonstrate how all this works using a very alpha version of all this new gear. It's relying on a PR that has not even been merged into Rails main yet. So expect all of the specifics here to change quite a lot before it is time for release of Rails 7. You probably won't be able to follow along with this tutorial in a few days from now, command by command, but it doesn't really matter. What I'm interested in showing is the general feel of this new system and the power that it has. So let's start by building a new Rails skeleton. As you can see, it no longer installs all of the node stuff. It runs a couple of installers from a few gems, import map-rails and hotwire-rails that simply alters this skeleton to work with the new gear. So let's set up a simple scaffold just to see what we have pre-configured now, because we've been running those two installers. And that is basically all we need to see the basics in motion here. I'm going to start the server, and we will have all the Hotwire gear pre-configured. And I'll show you that. The main thing you'll be able to see here is that we are running the new turbo. You see I'm looking at just these fetches here, and as we jump back and forth between the links, you can see that this is actually turbo running. So let's go back and see how all this is set up. You can see if I have a look at the elements, we have now an import map that describes all the libraries and frameworks that we're using for this application. You can see Turbo Rails is set up here. We have Stimulus, we have an import map autoloader for it, and some default controllers. Then there's a shim here that makes it such that this whole setup works with browsers that do not natively support import maps, such as Safari and Firefox. Import maps are natively supported in Chrome and Microsoft Edge, but this shim is 7K, I think, and does the work for these other browsers. And then finally, we import this application module, which is essentially our entry point, and I'll show you that as well. So let's jump over to the editor here, and I'll show you how this is all set up. First, we have a look at the application layout, and you can see we're calling JavaScript import maps tags. This was automatically set up by that installer for import map -rails, and that sets up the import map itself of a configuration object I'll show you in a second. It sets up the shim, and it calls the import on application. So the import map itself is configured here in a special file, which currently lives in initializer, and which currently requires that you restart the server every time you make a change, which is really annoying. So I'm going to move this to config/importmap.rb in the near future and make it reloadable. But you can see here, what this map does is essentially define all the modules that we want to depend on and make this translation of how ESM should be able to find these when we make the bare lookups. That hotwired/turbo-rails should point to turbo.js. And turbo.js is made available in the asset pipeline through the turbo-rails gem. So that is a local file being referenced here. You'll see that this is then sort of essentially all our load paths. And then if we take a look at application.js, which is the file that's being called as our entry point, you can see that we are importing two of those import mapped modules here. A Stimulus import map autoloader, which essentially looks at everything under controller slash in the import map and auto loads all those controllers automatically. I'll show you more about that in a second. And then it loads Turbo Rails. I showed you Turbo already running. So what's neat here is that it's so easy to add on to this setup and this system. And I'll show you that by adding some more default Rails features here from some of the other Rails frameworks. We can start by adding action text. And we will do that by simply calling action text install. This is an existing installer that has now been updated in Rails main to use ESM modules. So let's run that. We've got to run bundle as it tells us to get image processing going. And then we're going to run db migrate to get the additional tables for action text. Then let's hook that up to our application here. You can see, first of all, we've added tricks and Rails text to the application entry point. And they've also been mapped in the import map. So they're available in both places. But let's hook up that this post is going to have a rich text content. And then we change the old text area to use the rich text as well. And then, as I said, we gotta, well, don't have to restart the server because we haven't started yet. We're gonna start the server now and then have a look at how that looks. First, you'll see here that the import map has been extended to now also include tricks and action text. So if we go to make a new post here, you'll see that we have the tricks editor available. We can write rich text and then we can mark it up here. And then this actually even works with active storage out of the box. Active storage JavaScript has also been updated to work with ESM, so we can upload a file here. I'm just gonna drag something in. Oh, look at that. Gonna save it and boom, there you have it. That was all that was required to set up action text, use a tricks editor, have it all work off ESM in that application JS module. Well, that's pretty neat, but that's of course just frameworks that are included in Rails already. So let's have a look at something that we're going to make ourselves using Stimulus. First, let's have a look at the Stimulus controller. That is essentially just an example controller that ships with this setup. It's the hello controller. And then let's hook that up to a page anywhere. We're just going to use the post index data controller slash or equals hello. And then let's see if we can get that essentially running. We're just actually going to delete this post. There we go. Okay, hello world. That's pretty neat. That shows us that we didn't have to do any additional configuration because if you have a look at the import map, you'll see that we're automatically pinning all of the controllers under controller in this directory. And they're also automatically picked up whenever we make a change. And you can see here, what's neat is that there's no compile step. There is nothing in the back sitting to watch this. We're simply serving these text files directly to the browser and the browser picks up the changes. This is also true if we add another file. Let's do a goodbye controller here, which is essentially the same thing. And then goodbye world, a little sad. Adding this down here as a goodbye. And then let's see, boom, that is added on as well. So you can see we're automatically picking up these files. Nothing needs to be configured because we have that pin that runs in the entire directory, automatically mounts these things. All right, well, let's do a slightly more interesting example that relies on a second library outside of what just ships with Stimulus. We can make a little MD5 controller here under utilities. Utilities just showing you can nest these things as well. We'll make an MD5 controller. And then I will just copy in this stuff here. We don't need to connect anymore. This one is going to work off of a click. So we're going to make a convert action that takes an event. First of all, we need to cancel the default clicks. I said we don't go anywhere, and then we're going to go have a look at that targets text content, and we will convert that over to a MD5 version of that. So let's do MD5. Well, of course, we don't have an MD5 library yet. Let's set it up that we're going to import that. And then we need to declare that in our import map. So let's go here and we're going to add a new library directly. I'm just going to copy in something from, let's take it from Skypack. Skypack have these really neat, easy to remember URLs, but they do some redirecting. So in production, you'll want to change that to something else that is pinned, but we can just start here for now. Okay, so now we have the MD5 controller using a separate library that we've configured in our import map. So let's hook that up here so that we can actually do something with it. Just going to copy paste in a usage of that. You see we map utilities --MD5 to that controller we just set up. We're going to have a link that just called hash that, and that's going to have an action that calls that convert action that we had on the MD5 controller. So we need to restart the server. As I said, this won't be necessary when we're all done with this and this is set up proper, but for now it is, such that we pick up that MD5 library. So now we have this new link, and if we click it, look at that, hash that. Again, if we go back and have a look at the import map, you can see that we are relying here on Skypack to find it. If we go have a look at everything here, you can see that Skypack is doing this lookup, and then it's turning that into a few other fetches as well, but that's all happening behind the scenes. Okay, that's pretty neat. But an MD5 library hooked up is not exactly the most exciting thing in the world. So let's set our sights a little higher. Let's try to make something with Vue. Okay, we're going to go back here and first set up Vue. Neatly, this is set up here, so we can just uncomment it. Now Vue is available to be imported. We'll do something a little more interesting here. We'll set up an additional directory here, just called components, and we will have some Vue components.js, and I am just going to copy and paste in some Vue components that are from the Vue JS site, so you can see what's going on here. We are importing Vue again from this import mapped bare identifier Vue. And we need to link that up in application. So we're going to import that here as well. Actually, first we need to map it. So let's map these new components. We're going to do another one of those pinalls from app JavaScript components. And we can actually map it under something else. We can just call it comps. So you can essentially rename the file structure into what you want that to be looked up as. The files themselves are still going to match what the files are, but this is just an example showing how this could work. So we're going to do comps, and then we're going to do Vue components. Great. And then we need to have the HTML that is needed for those Vue components. Let's paste that in. You can see there's just one that's iterating over, and then there's one that's calling a method for reversing the message. Since we've added again to the import map, we're going to restart, and then let's have a look at that. Whoa, here you go. Again, if you take a look at the import map, we've added the new controllers are here. The new components is mapped. We have Vue lined up as well. This is pretty neat. It didn't take very much to do that. And of course you can make it far more intricate. And if you want to have Vue work together with Turbo, you're gonna have to do a little bit more work, of course, to instantiate the Vue components once Turbo load is called, but we will leave that for an exercise for a later day. Let's add in another library that's commonly used here. Let's add in some D3. I think we have that mapped up as an example. Yes. This example uses esm.sh, which has this really neat feature of being able to bundle libraries that have a lot of dependencies. D3 have a lot of different components. If you just look that up natively through Skypack or something else like that, it triggers quite a few requests, but esm.sh, you can pass $bundle, and it'll bundle it all up into a single file, which is quite neat. So we'll add another component here called D3 component.js. Again, I'm just going to paste in an example that I found somewhere. It doesn't really matter what this code is. What matters is that we are selectively importing just select and zoom from D3. And we've already put it into our import map, so let's add it to our application JS as well. It's still under comps. It's the D3 component. And then we need the SVG that this D3 component works with. This is just this simple square that we can use. Again, we added D3, we restart, we have another look here, and there you go. There is a D3 component all set up. We have a look at the network here, starting to include quite a lot of stuff. Locally here, we're not running HTTP2, so we're not getting everything lined up, but here you can see the D3 bundle being loaded. Pretty neat, but we don't have to rely on just having a single entry point. For example, on this page right now, we are including all the JavaScript stuff, the tricks and action text setup to be able to do this editor, but we don't really need it on this index page. So what if we split those two things up into separate bits? Let's do that now. So let's go to our application JS here and look at tricks and action text, and we're going to take these out, and we're going to create a new file called rich text.js. Paste that in here. We need to pin it, just like application. We're going to pin rich text, and then we have to include it selectively. So we're going to set it up such that we can add to the head in a different template here. We're going to add to the head in the form template because that is where we need these additional bits. Pasting that in, we take the head content, and what we need to import here is one of the things that was called automatically by JavaScript import maps tags with just application, but here we're calling an import module tag for rich text. So let's save that and have a look. We're going to have a look here and see that we no longer include tricks. Yep, well, tricks. There's no tricks. But if we go here, well, then something is not lined up. Let's see what's actually going on here. Do we still not have tricks? No, we don't. Let's go to the import map. We set up rich text. We try to include it. Oh, I don't think I restarted after I added the rich text import map. See, that's pretty annoying. You will definitely want to get that fixed, and I hope to get that fixed shortly. Now you can see that we're loading tricks and we're loading action text on just this page. And if we go back here, you can see that we don't have that. So this is a way to do selective loading. All right, one final test here, one final example that I can show you, which is kind of funny because when I wrote this up in the blog post, I thought, you know what? No one's going to do this. This isn't even possible, but it is. Let's make a React component. So the thing about React is if you want to use JSX, you of course have to do compilation, but you can actually do React without JSX. So that is what we're going to try to do here. We're going to set up the import map with React and React DOM. Boom, we added those two in. I just have them set up on Skypack right now. And then we can go create another component here called React component JS. And I'm just going to paste in the simplest hello world example. As you can see here, we're not using JSX. This is a little more cumbersome, but it is certainly doable, certainly workable. I'm assigning that just to E, so it's kind of a little bit more easy to use. We have to add this component to here. Components, React component, and then we have to add the fact that this is expecting a React div over on this page here, ID equals React, and then we should see hello world. Let's do 1, 2, 3. We have a few hello worlds, and then we need to restart again because we've added the React pins. Would you look at that? Hello world 1, 2, 3 generated by React. And again, the neat thing is there is no compilation step on our side here. So if we go back and we change hello React and go back here, it is of course instantly available. So that is the new path that I've been exploring. There's a lot of stuff left to do. There's a lot of weird bugs. I'm still working on things like module preloading to improve performance, but this is very promising, I'd say. Clearly much nicer to work with, faster to set up, no compilation times, no Webpack configurations, and so on and so forth. Again, not necessarily for everyone. There will be more complicated things. As I said, if you need to use JSX, then this won't really do it for you, but plenty of people will be able to use this. I am looking into converting Hey to use this. We essentially just use stimulus with Hey and a few other things, so we should be able to convert this over, and I'll continue to work on this for the release of Rails 7 whenever that is going to be. All right, that's it. Hope you enjoyed this presentation, and follow along as more updates come.